Hello, and welcome back to Roll Again. I'm Steve, and today we're going to start a new session called A Touch of Class, where we're going to kind of review some of the classes in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, some of the benefits, and see which ones might work for you. So you're starting off a new character, whether you're brand new to Dungeons & Dragons or you've played for a long time and you're a veteran. Some of the things that we want to look at are just the basics and some of the pros to each class. In this first episode, we're going to look at Fighter. It's probably one of the oldest classes in Dungeons and Dragons, goes all the way back to first edition. But also, it's one of the probably most overlooked classes, I think. Many people get in Dungeons and Dragons and they want to go with something a little bit more exotic. Wizards, warlocks, druids, right? They want to go with spell casting because that is very alluring, right, to have spellcasting, and fighters are thought of as just running in and whacking stuff, and that's it. But there are a lot of benefits to the fighter class. First off, it is one of the classes that is probably a little bit of a better introduction to new players, especially if you haven't really had experience with the rules of spellcasting, with all the different spells at your disposal, things like that. Not having to worry about that school of spellcasting in a fighter is a little bit easier, but you can also go with some martial archetypes in the fighter class that can introduce you to spellcasting at a little bit of a slower pace. But also, it's a great, to me, it's just a really great class. I've played fighters before. I've also played spellcasters. I've played rangers. I've played druids. I've played lots of different classes in my time in Dungeons and Dragons. But I still find myself coming back to play fighters over and over again. There's a lot of different martial archetypes for fighters that are available, which gives you a lot of options. But then I just feel like there's a lot of benefits to it, and it tends to be an overlooked class. So jumping in, the fighter really is probably the most diverse class in Dungeons and Dragons. Anybody can be a fighter. The thing to keep in mind is that also I think sometimes we forget that a fighter is not just someone who picked up a sword. Right? A fighter is not anybody. It should be distinct from your thoughts about maybe someone in the city guard or someone who just decided to be an adventurer today, right? That's not really what a fighter is in Dungeons and Dragons. Someone who's a fighter, even at first level in Dungeons and Dragons, is someone who already has a mastery of weapons and armor. They're not someone who just saw a sword yesterday, picked it up, and decided to go kill dragons. Right? That's not a fighter in Dungeons and Dragons. Someone who's a fighter class is a person who has already mastered weapons and armor to a certain extent, even at low levels. It's also someone who's expected to have a thorough knowledge of combat, right? Of strategies, of combat maneuvers. And so it's not just your dumb lunk who's going to run up and hit something with an axe. A fighter played to its perfect end as far as Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing goes, your fighter should be your person that's making strategy, right? Not just, a lot of times people think, oh, the spellcasters, because they have such high intelligence, things like that, they're the ones making it. Your fighter should be making strategy as well, because a properly background fighter in Dungeons and Dragons as a class is someone who should have a lot of experience in fighting and in war. So they should know firsthand what strategies might work, what strategies might not work, right? Should we flank this person? Should we ambush this enemy? Those types of ideas should be coming from your fighter. And so if you're going to role play it efficiently and really embrace this class, that's kind of where you should be going at from a headspace. And part of that falls into our next piece, which is building a fighter, right? So we decided we want to be a fighter. How do we go about building it? A lot of people say, well, let's start let's start getting ability scores. I don't think that's even the first step. I think your first step in building a fighter is deciding what's your background, right? And this is suggested in the player's handbook as well. What's your background as a fighter, right? Where did you learn these skills? We just talked about how a fighter is not somebody who just decided to fight off the street. This is someone who has a mastery of weapons and armor and a thorough knowledge of combat. So where did your player learn those things, right? Were they part of an army? Were they part of a militia? Were they part of a bandit group, right? Were they mercenaries? Did they have some sort of a tutor who had been someone who had been a soldier and had taught them from a young age some of these weapon masteries and knowledge of combat, right? Where did you learn this stuff? You didn't just pick it up off the street. And that really can play into your background. And it can really, as a dungeon master, that kind of background is something I love because it gives me a lot of options on how to bring in different role-playing pieces and different strategies and other events that go on in the campaign and the adventure, right? Maybe we have the fighter run into someone that they used to serve with, right, in a city guard, or someone that they served with as a soldier, right? Maybe this fighter is plagued by gruesome memories of a war they fought in, right? This can come into a lot of pieces. I know, even thinking of like, Eberron, Eberron rising from the last war. That land is war torn and it's recovering from terrible battles and wars, right? So to have a fighter who is kind of plagued by memories and by dreams of stuff that they saw in the war, right? That kind of brings in a much more thorough and rich role-playing piece to Dungeons and Dragons. And so I think that the fighter class allows for that. And we don't always think about it, and we don't always thoroughly give the fighter a strong background that they should have. So once you've decided kind of what the background is, now we kind of know which direction we're going to go with. There are a few things you should keep in mind. No matter how you do scores, whether you do a point-buy system for scores, whether you do a custom piece, right? I prefer to roll for ability scores. I'm a strong believer in that. I think it's worked in a lot of campaigns I've been a player in, as well as a dungeon master. So when I have my characters create their own character, or my players create their characters, I go with the tried and true, roll 4d6s, and we toss out the lowest of the 4d6s. So you have an opportunity to have the highest of is an 18, right? And then you just roll them, right? I don't say, okay, I'm rolling for strength this time, and we roll 4d4s. I don't think that's the best way to do it either, because you do want to be able to focus on certain abilities, right? So I have my players roll 4d6s 6 times for each ability, but not specific. So they roll them, and now they end up with, a 16, a 13, a 13, an 11, a 10, and a 9, right? Now they can choose where they want to put each of those scores, under which ability it would go with. And that's now where our abilities come into play. After we've rolled, after we've got a background, we kind of know who this person is, where we want to go with them. Also, what race they're going to be, right? I'm not a strong proponent for deciding your race so that you can bump up and beef up your class, right? I'm not a proponent of saying, well, we're going to go with this specific race because they give me all of these pluses to ability scores that are going to feed my class. I think that, to be honest, really gets away from the spirit of Dungeons and Dragons. This is a fantasy role-playing game, and it should allow you to explore that. So what kind of race do you think is cool, right? It shouldn't matter if it's something that we think, we're going to go with a variant human, or we're going to go with a Goliath, because those things have, pluses to strength. Those things have pluses that are going to bonus up our fighter, right? They're going to really make our fighter a strong character, and they're really going to make them basically be a powerhouse on the battlefield. You're starting at level 1, 2, 3, wherever you're going to start, right? You're not necessarily going to be a powerhouse character on the battlefield, right? That's why any good DM should be starting you with monsters that you can fight and situations that you can go through that should be equal to your level, right? You should have balanced battles. You should have balanced role-playing situations that you're put into. And so I don't think that that's really something you should play. I think it actually goes against the spirit of the actual game. Decide what you want. Yes, Goliath makes great fighters, right? Yes, humans make great fighters, but so do dwarves, right? They do have a good constitution, which helps to the fighter. But even more so than that, I'd love to see, a halfling fighter, right? Or a tiefling fighter, or a Genasi fighter, right? There's a lot of races that are available to you through Dungeons and Dragons. Explore it. And having a character who is not a stereotypical race that's a fighter, that gets boring, right? So seeing someone that's playing a race that they may not necessarily have thought is the best fighter race makes it more interesting from a role playing advantage. And I think that makes the game a lot more fun. It really increases the richness of the backstory, and it also increases um, the situations and the role-playing opportunities that the fighter gets into. So try anything. You don't have to choose certain ones, right? Like I said, I'm strongly against that. How do we make a power build? Who cares, right? If you're playing the correct way, right, you're going to roll, like I said, the way that I roll for abilities. You get 6 different scores. You can choose your 2 highest ones to put in the abilities that work best for this class, no matter what race your character comes from. So you can help to bolster that yourself already. Plus, you do get opportunities, as we're going to see in a little bit, to improve your ability scores as you increase in level. So you can always bolster some ability scores as you get to be more of an experienced player with this character. So don't waste your time just trying to focus in on the best race to utilize for a fighter. I think you should pick the race that really calls to you and the one that you think is going to be the most fun to play, and then make that your fighter. And I suggest that for any class. So with that in mind, when you do roll your ability scores and you start putting them in their places and deciding what scores are what, there are a few places you should focus, right? With a fighter, the number one place you want your high score to be is either strength, if you're going to be a melee combat fighter, right? Or dexterity, if you think you're going to be a range fighter. So you're going to be an archer. You're going to be someone who's picking people off from a distance, right? Then you want dex to be your highest. So strength or dex should be your highest score. If you're not sure, then then you should split the difference and make those your 2 highest scores to begin with. After strength or dex, constitution needs to be your next high score when you're placing your ability scores. Those will create a solid foundation for your fighter. The next thing we move into is class features. Right? What are some of the benefits of being a fighter? What are some of the great things they get? And this is really where I feel like, I don't know if fighters just never had a great marketing PR team, but a lot of times people don't talk about the benefits the fighters get, some of the class features that they really do get. And that starts even at a base level at hit points. Fighters get, for hit dice, they get 1d10. It's a lot better than most classes. They also, when they're deciding your hit points, at level 1, you get 10 hit points plus your Constitution modifier to start with. This is why the Constitution modifier obviously comes into play, as well as Constitution is just your ability to take hits and to keep going, right? It's your character's ability to persevere, basically, and to continue on. It's endurance. And so that's really important if you're going to be a fighter. So at hit points, you get 10 plus your Constitution modifier at level 1, and then you get 1d10 roll plus your Constitution modifier to increase your hit points at each level. You also get proficiencies with all types of armor and shields. So you aren't restricted in any way to what type of armor you want to wear. Obviously, if you play with a dungeon master like myself who does utilize encumbrance rules, right, you do want to make sure you know how much weight you're going to be carrying. But if you have a high strength, that can help out anyway. Also with weapons, you're proficient in all simple weapons as well as all martial weapons. So you really have a wide range of weapons to choose from. That goes back to the basics of the fighter character or the fighter class, which is you have a mastery of weapons and armor. So that gives you a large group, pretty much almost all weapons that you can choose from. But definitely everything categorized as a simple weapon or a martial weapon, and all types of armor are at your disposal as a fighter, which is pretty cool. Saving throws, you get bonus saving throws. Your saving throws, you get bonuses to your strength and your constitution. You also get to choose fighting styles. You have fighting styles that are at your disposal. Some of the fighting styles you can choose from are archery. Archery fighting style basically gives you a +2 to your attack. Defense fighting style, which is a +1 to your armor class. You can choose the dueling fighting style, which gives you a +2 to your damage when you're using a weapon in one hand and you don't have anything else in your other hand. So as long as you just have one weapon, but you're not holding another weapon in your other hand, you can use the dueling fighting style, which gives you a +2 to all your damage. There's also great weapon fighting, which basically means that when you roll a damage roll, if you roll a 1 or a 2, you can re-roll that. Although on your re-roll, if you also roll a 1 or a 2, you're stuck with the second roll. But it still gives you a benefit to probability. If you roll a 1 or a 2, the chances of rolling another 1 or 2 are very slim on your damage. So it does allow you to kind of re-roll that. That's a great weapon fighting style. You also have protection. If you have a shield that you're using, you get to impose disadvantage to any creature who's attacking someone else that's within 5 feet of you. So if a creature is attacking one of your party members and they're within 5 feet of you and you have a shield, you can utilize protection, which allows you to impose disadvantage to that creature's attack. So they've got to roll disadvantage during their attack against any of your party members that are within 5 feet of you, which is pretty cool, actually. And I don't see that used a whole lot, at least in the games I've played in. Also, you can choose 2-weapon fighting, which adds your ability modifier to a second attack. If you're fighting with 2 weapons, you get to add your ability modifier to your second weapon attack, which is kind of nice as well. To be honest, depending on the type of fighter you want to be, it really helps you decide which of these fighting styles that you want to take. Also, you can take more than one fighting style. You take one at the beginning of being a fighter, but later on, as you advance in levels, if you have the opportunity to take another fighting style, you can take one. Sometimes people get a little bit confused with that. What the player handbook says is you can't take the same fighting style again, right? So if you took archery because you are going to be a range fighter, if you took the archery fighting style, which gives you a +2 to attack, later on as you level up, if you get the opportunity to take another fighting style, you can't take archery again, therefore giving yourself a +4 to attack with archery, right? With range weapons. You can't do that. You can't stack them. But if you already have archery with a +2 to attack, you can take defense and give yourself a +1 to armor class. That's allowed. You just can't take the same fighting style over and over again. What I can imagine is someone who's, level 15 archer, or they've even decided to take on the Arcane Archer martial archetype, and now they've taken 3 archery fighting classes. So they're getting basically a +6 to their attack on top of anything else that they're already getting, right? Any other benefits and any other ability modifiers that they're already getting on their attack, they're then adding another 6. And that can get kind of out of control. And so I think that this is really a good rule, that you can't take the same one over and over again. Especially as a fighter, when you have, 6 different fighting styles, even right here in the player's handbook at your disposal, that gives you a lot of different things that you can try out. It gives you a lot of benefits that you can add on to your fighter. So fighting styles is something to definitely look into, right? They're in the player handbook, so reread them as you're deciding to start your fighter. Some of the other things to keep in mind. Fighters also get the second wind ability, right? Second wind basically says that once per short or long rest, you can roll a 1d10 plus your level as a fighter and regain that many hit points. So it's basically like you get a second, they call it second wind, right? But basically you rejuvenate yourself. If you're starting to get low on hit points, you can roll a 1d10. This does take an action. So you can roll a 1d10 plus your fighter level. If you're level 1, you can have up to 11 hit points, which almost doubles your hit points probably at level 1, right? So you can roll 1d10 plus your level and regain that many hit points. So that's a really strong. You can't go over your max hit points though, right? So if you have a max hit points of 12 and you're down to 4 hit points and you pull the second wind action and you roll a d10 plus your 11 and you say, you roll a, 10, you can't go to 14 if your max hit points is 12 at that time, right? But it can fill you right up to 12. So that's really kind of a cool thing. I'll tell you, I've played fighters before, like I said. Currently in one of the campaigns that I'm a player character in, I'm playing an Eldritch Knight at 6th level. And I've used the second wind function a number of times, especially not just when I'm in a battle and I'm getting lower in hit points, but if we finished a battle and then we stumble upon another encounter before we've had a rest. Right? It's a quick and easy way to just use one action and restore a large number of hit points. So that's really cool. And again, it works. You can use it once per short or long rest. So that's pretty nice as well. If you're in a dungeon or something like that, all you need is a short rest to be able to get the second wind ability back. Also, fighters have the action surge. Starting at 2nd level for all fighters, you get an additional action once per rest. So in your turn, when you get to do an action, a movement, or bonus action, you can call upon your action surge and take another action. Especially as a low-level fighter, this is cool because it means once per long or short rest, you can attack, and then you can take another action and attack again right then. And you get 2 attacks, which is pretty cool. That leads us into our next piece, which is you get an extra attack at 5th level. All fighters, when they hit 5th level, now can attack twice during their turn, which is pretty cool. And I use that quite a bit as well as an Eldritch Knight. You get an extra attack at 5th level. You also get a 3rd attack per turn at 11th level. And then at 20th level, if you get that high, many people don't, but if you max out at 20th level, you get 4 attacks per turn, which is pretty cool. Fighters also get ability score improvements as you level up. At levels 4, 6, 8, 12, 14, 16, and 19, you have the opportunity at each of those milestones to improve 1 ability score by 2 points or 2 ability scores by 1 point apiece. I mentioned earlier, this is where being able to choose kind of any race you want to play as a fighter comes into play, because even if you didn't even if you didn't have great initial rolls on your abilities, at 4th level you now get the chance to bolster your strength or your constitution or your dexterity by 2 points, or you could bolster 2 of those categories by 1 point apiece, which is pretty cool. And at 6th level, you get to do that once again. At 8th level, again. So this is a way to really not worry as much about choosing a race that's going to fit your class. Choose a race you want to play, and then choose your class that you want to play as well. That's really the fun of Dungeons and Dragons. You also, within the fighter class, you can utilize the Indomitable function. Indomitable means that at 9th level, it's a higher level type ability. At 9th level, the Indomitable ability says that you can re-roll saving throws once per long rest, or once per long or short rest, I'm sorry. So once within a long or short rest, if you do a saving throw and you fail, you can re-roll it. Now again, much like the great weapon fighting, the second roll you're stuck with. So if you fail the second roll saving throw, that's all you get. But at least it increases the chances of passing with a second throw. So at 13th level, you can do 2 re-rolls on saving throws per long or short rest. And at 17th level, you can get 3 saving throw re-rolls per long or short rest. So a lot of functions that are available to a fighter. And we haven't even discussed yet martial archetypes. So let's get into that. As a fighter, when you reach third level, you need to start focusing in on your specialty, right? You are already a general master of weapons and armor, and you're a master of general knowledge of combat, right? It's a thorough knowledge of combat, but it's combat in general, all sorts of combat. So at third level, as you become a little bit more experienced as a fighter, you get to start focusing in on a specific area of interest, a specific mastery. And there are a lot of martial archetypes available to fighters, probably more so than almost any other class, which is what really, I think, makes the fighter class a cool class to play also, is you can play a fighter character 7 or 8 different times and be a completely different character, be a completely different type of fighter, right? So at third level, you have to choose your martial archetype. There's a few that you can choose. The player's handbook has 3. It has the champion, it has the battle master, and it has the Eldritch Knight. The champion is basically your quintessential fighter. It's the kind of person you think of that's in the arena, gladiator, right? Someone who's just a great fighter, is hard to beat. That's your champion overall. There's a lot of specifics to each of these martial archetypes. I'm not going to get into them in this video because it would take forever. We'll have some follow-up videos that focus on each of the archetypes. But champion is the first. Second is battle master, which allows you to start specializing and becoming an expert in certain maneuvers within Dungeons and Dragons and within fighting specifically. The third in the player's handbook option is the Eldritch Knight. It's one of my favorites. Like I said, I'm playing an Eldritch Knight right now. The Eldritch Knight is a great one if you're a beginner, you're getting into Dungeons and Dragons, you decided to be a fighter, but you think you'd like to become a spellcaster at some point. The Eldritch Knight allows a mix of fighter and spellcaster. It is not a 50-50 mix, just so you're aware. It's not what we necessarily call an arcane fighter, right? What an Eldritch Knight is, in my mind at least, the understanding I've got from playing them, is that an Eldritch Knight is more like 75% fighter, 25% spellcaster. So there's not a lot of spells that are available to you, and not a whole lot of cantrips, but there are some. Mainly from the Abjuration and Evocation spell schools, which is defense and offense. The Abjuration spell school allows you to have defensive spells and cantrips, and the Evocation spell school allows you to choose cantrips and spells that do damage to multiple targets, which both can be very helpful as a fighter. Probably one of the most useful cantrips that's available to an Eldritch Knight right away at third level when you take Eldritch Knight is Eldritch Blast. It's the cantrip I've chosen. I use it all the time in fighting, and it gives you a great range spell to utilize as a fighter, and it really works out pretty well. After those 3 initial martial archetypes that are available to you in the player's handbook, there are a few others, and there's probably more than this list. List is not extensive. It's just a list that I quickly came up with of a lot of the martial archetypes that I've am experienced with or have read about and seen played. The next archetype is Arcane Archer. That can be found in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. It's if you really want to focus on becoming an archer, so you've already chosen your dexterity as your highest score when you made your fighter because you knew you wanted to be a range fighter, and now you want to bolster that up a little bit. So the Arcane Archer allows you to be able to mix spells with some of your arrows, be able to enchant arrows and use some spells from range to bolster your archery and your ranged weapons attacks. So that's pretty cool. Also, there's the Cavalier. which is in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. You also have the Echo Knight martial archetype, which is in the Explorer's Guide to Wildemont. The Samurai, which is an interesting mix of fighter and charisma. The Samurai brings a number of benefits to it that have to do with social class and interaction with role-playing as well, which is pretty cool. That's also in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. And then the Purple Dragon Knight, which is in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. Again, there are probably martial archetypes I'm not including here. If you find some others, go ahead and try to implement them and use them. The one thing I always say is double check with your dungeon master to make sure it's something he's familiar with and that it works in the campaign that you're playing. But again, that right there is just 8 archetypes. So you could play 8 different types of fighter, right? It gives you so many. To me, the fighter class has so many opportunities in it. And I feel like it's not always given the respect it deserves. Very often people just think fighters are just bang, 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 not think, right? Just hit stuff, attack, become a murder hobo. And that's not really what a fighter is, right? A fighter played to its full benefit and opportunity is someone who's the strategist on the team, right? The fighter is the person who is thinking about how do we all work together as a team? How do we use our strengths in a combat situation? And that's really how they should be role played as well. Some things to keep in mind. If you take, say, like, an Eldritch Knight, right? Pay attention to your martial archetype requirements when it comes to ability scores. Because while you started with strength and dex or constitution as your strongest ability scores, there might be others that you need to bolster at level 4 when you get to do an ability score improvement. Eldritch Knight uses intelligence as a spell casting, right? So you may want to boost up your intelligence ability score a little bit to help with your spell casting as an Eldritch Knight. And there's a few other options that, within the martial archetypes that you want to pay attention to. So like I said, we'll do videos on each of those. I think they each deserve their own video, and to try to squeeze everything about those 8 martial archetypes into this video would just not do them justice. So if you heard one of the archetypes that you're interested in, look it up. I gave you the books that they are mentioned in first, and you can look them up, or even just Google them, and a lot of times you'll find a lot of information from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition on the internet that'll tell you about these martial archetypes. So again, hopefully this kind of gets you in the mood to start a fighter if you haven't played one before, or if you're just starting to play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I hope it's given you a lot of information and maybe inspired you to start, playing a fighter, and maybe something that, a race that you never had thought about using as a fighter before. A tabaxi fighter would be interesting, or even goblins, now that they could be playable races, right? I think a goblin fighter would be pretty cool. They definitely have the attitude for it, but I think a goblin fighter would be really a cool addition as a player character. So there's lots of opportunities here as a fighter. I hope that we continue not to overlook fighters, because they are cool. And this has just been the first episode in the Touch of Class series. We'll come back next week with an episode on druids, which will be our next piece. But for now, I hope that this has enlightened you a little bit to the fighter class and inspired you to utilize it. Until next time, please like, subscribe, leave comments on your thoughts. Did I miss something? Is there anything you found to be advantageous as a fighter playing in Dungeons & Dragons? Or as a dungeon master, is there something that you think makes fighters a good class, or that kind of is overlooked about fighters? Add it to the comments. Like, subscribe to the channel so that you can get the updates on not only our Touch of Class series, but also my unboxing and my miniatures series. And you can keep up with all of the news on Roll Again. Thanks. Until next time, as always, keep playing and have fun.